Okay girls, here you go. This is my review for the Twilight Saga, Eclipse. Now of course this is the pretentiously titled Twilight Saga, pretty much, but whatever. Eclipse is the third movie in what will be a 5-movie series. Yay. In the final book, Breaking Dawn, will be split into 2 movies. Can we say copying Harry Potter? Now, I'll admit, I was very generous in my review of the first film. I found the second one to be just downright atrociously awful, made my 10 worst of 2009. That said, this one will not make my 10 worst of 2010, but it will certainly not make my 10 best, or will I really just like it much at all. But anyway, I gotta say, this one almost made the mark. For those who aren't familiar with David Slade, the director, he's the guy who directed a real vampire movie called 30 Days of Night. And again, that movie in itself wasn't what you would call overly brilliant, but at the same time, it had realistic vampires that were actually scary and just lots of great, horror movie gore, and this guy truly had a vision of how to stylize, that type of aspect of a film. Now, again, Twilight's not a horror film, but again, it has horror overtones to it in terms of, well, hello, they're involving vampires and werewolves here. So, when it was announced that he would be directing this film, horror fans were really intrigued or confused or just downright angry, and just message boards just lit up everywhere. Now, by his decision to tackle this franchise, it was a big risk. The opening scene of the film is a definite departure from the previous two, taking place at night in the rain in the Stoke streets of Washington State, that is. Now, a young man is being stalked by something dark and fast, ooh, and when he's finally attacked, he lays writhing on the ground, letting out this really unpleasant scream, but let's just say it's more bearable than the screams Kristen Stewart was belting on the last one. And I gotta say, this was a pleasant change when we opened up this film. Now, sadly, from there, we cut directly to Robert Pattinson. Of course, once again, lazing about, showing the emotion of pretty much, well, this is pretty much about as much emotion Robert Pattinson shows in a roll of Scotch tape. Okay. Well, anyway, of course, they go on this whole thing, and they're laying together. Him and Bella, played by the always talented Kristen Stewart, lazing about an open field of pretty flowers and whatnot. And yes, Edward Sparkles and all. Sparkle is there, but thankfully the scene is not near as bad as it sounds. That said, it still looks pretty bad if you ask me. Now, the most sparkle thing is, out of the way right here. Thankfully, they don't really overdo it in this film. Now, Bella is still bugging Edward to make her a vampire. Just put her and everyone else out of their misery, please. And he's finally decided to agree if she decides to marry him. She's hesitant, though, about marrying him for some reason. And, of course, while having no problem joining the ranks of the undead, Bella's father, Billy Burke, a very talented actor who's actually done well in the Twilight films, is concerned that she's spending all her time with Edward and has no life, pretty much like the viewers of this movie and whole franchise, even ignoring her friends. I know I'm going to take a lot of flack for that one. He pushes her to see Jacob, Taylor Lautner, who, in my opinion, makes Robert Pattinson look like Michael Caine, with whom she hasn't spoken to since they're following out the last film. Now, I gotta say this, in the last film, when Lautner was supposed to not be able to be cold because it's a werewolf thing, you could visibly see him shivering in the cold scenes. I mean, really, they couldn't work around that somehow? But anyway, enough about that. I thought that's something I forgot to point out when I saw New Moon. Anyway, meanwhile, something fishy is going on in Seattle with many people going missing and yada 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 yada. The authorities don't know, gang related, they just assume whatever. It turns out it's that vampire chick Victoria, and who, of course, her lover was killed by the Cullens in the first Twilight film. Now, of course, she is building a newborn vampire army. What are newborns? So glad you asked. Anyway, the newborn breed is, well, it's a bit complex. They're creative vampires, and they are much stronger and more savage than vampires who have been around for a while. It seems the first 2 months as a vampire makes you crazy and super strong, more than usual, and quite as reckless. Now, the Volturi, led by always reliable Dakota Fanning, seems to either have a hand in this, or are just letting it happen despite the risk of, bringing vampires to light, so to speak. Now, it's in this film that the love triangle between Edward, Bella, and Jacob really comes to a head, while Jacob trying to last-ditch effort to win her over. It seems a part of this strategy is to appear in every scene in the film shirtless. That may work on 13-year-old emo girls, but it shouldn't work on somebody like Kristen Stewart. Anyway, despite the fact that Bella has feelings for him, her feelings for Edward are stronger and much complicated ensues. I think that's what her Facebook status says. Bella Swan is in a relationship and it's complicated. Eventually, the werewolves and the vampires must work together if they want to protect Bella from Victoria and her army of newborns despite their generations of deep hatred and distrust. Now, of course, we still have the problems within Edward and the Cullens and as well as Jacob. But yeah, here's what the scenes of the movie I really like. Now, the action sequences in this film are really well done, but this story still has its holes and still bugs me. Why is Edward Cullen, a vampire who's been alive over 100 years, so insanely in love with this morose, uninteresting teenage girl who seemed to have some intrigue in the first one, but has just really turned into nothing? And not only does that give him, you know, the #1 creepy old guy award of the year, I mean, think about it. He's 100. Okay, I don't care if he still looks like a teenager. He still has life experience like George Burns did. Now, given his character background and given this film, you'd expect him to go for a sophisticated, worldly woman, maybe in her 30s at best. But really, Jacob being a teen himself and having known Bella his life, I can actually understand that more than I can understand Edward's whole thing. And why am I going so in-depth about this? My goodness gracious. Anyway, the acting in here is, of course, as weak as usual. You know, when you stick a bunch of talented actors like Kristen Stewart and Anna Kendrick and Billy Burke in a franchise like this, and Dakota Fanning, I might add, as well as Michael Sheen, and I'm talking about the whole franchise with the talented actors they put in here, it just doesn't seem to, you know, really click. And even the talented actors are just left with nothing to do. Kristen Stewart's best work is far from these movies. And I'm just so sick of everything. And the dialogue is, of course, its usual overwrought BS. Twilight Eclipse is a watchable film, but still not enough to recommend it. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5.